you're looking at, and you may be able to answer this as well, Pam, but you're looking at the necessary data to actually automate some of these things. Is there a baseline for companies that they need to apply? You know, saying, you know, you actually haven't collected enough data to automate this process, or is it always possible? Is it basically ingest, start just analyzing, you know, process that's happening and then apply, or is it always you got to have the data store and then we can go forward?
My personal view is there's too much focus on data. We've got the data, it's just automatically created. It's understanding what that data means in the context of a business process. And that's a really very important thing here, is context. Computers don't really understand context. You know, it takes a human being to understand. So maybe I mean, we built a product in the 90s that was used for detecting money laundering in banks. It could only be done with AI just because of the sheer volumes of data. But what it could do is spot an unusual sequence of activity, a statistically unusual sequence. But it had no idea whether that was actually money laundering or whether it was a normal behavior, whether it was a fraud, whether somebody's buying a house. There were so many factors, so much context that needed to be put around that. And so it always needed the person to be able to present the machine with the information and the parameters and the context. And then the machine could charge at it and then say, right, I've looked through 200 million transactions and I've found 100 anomalous transactions, you know, the needle in the needle stack. Right. And that's what things are really good at. But understanding the context of it is a human skill.
But that is going to, I mean, I guess that is changing, right? I mean, we're starting to get, just, you talked about, that was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, surprised me.
Yes.
Like, thinking about AI in the 90s, we weren't really talking about it then, but, you know, statistical analysis, it makes sense, and it kind of all connects to that. But aren't we getting closer to that point where, you know, the robot or the algorithm can sort of apply some of that context as well?
Well, it's interesting. We were one of the first AI enterprise companies ever. And the amount of processing power that we needed and the cost of that processing power was enormous. But now it's a standard.
Right, now it's changed. I could do it on my phone, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So we've gone through Moore's Law. These are the things that are, there's actually not a lot that is brand new in the AI field today. Neural networks and backpropagation, fuzzy logic, genetic algorithms, they've all been around since the 90s.
So it's all a product of the processing.
It's a product of power and data and the massive data.
Right, signals too.
Exactly,
there's so many signals.
And we know that, you know, there's an exponential curve. There's as much data going to be produced next year than the last 20 years. And so we're on all of these very exciting exponential curves. They call it the second half of the chessboard, and I'm sure you know that parable of the emperor and the rice. And when you get, you know, if you just double on every chessboard, when you get 1 to the power 64 minus 1 rice, it's as big as Mount Everest, you know. Right. So we're in.
It's like folding that piece of paper over and over again. Where suddenly, you're.
So we're in that second half of the chessboard. We're in the world where all of these very exciting algorithms can be applied, and I think it's the democratization of them which is the really interesting thing. They're out of the hands of the PhDs. Sorry, Leslie, and all of the super clever chaps, and they're being put into the hands of the people in operations. So, you know, we had our conference this week, and it was very interesting to see business practitioners talking about the practical use of this technology and how they're going to transform their service.
So go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to come back to something Pat said about the data, because don't you think, though, Pat, that you need to be careful because of the quality of the data?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, could mean that, you know, what your algorithms are actually processing are actually going to lead you down the wrong route because of that base quality of your data. So we end up talking to our clients very often about, you know, what can we do to get the data quality?
Yes.
And it doesn't need to be everything.
How quickly do you find that out? Like, you go to a client and like, yes, we're ready for AI, and then you look at their data, you know, do you immediately know you're not really ready?
Yeah, and I think the thing is about, you know, what you said, and Pat said as well about, you know, the amount of data that's actually being produced nowadays. So it's about, you know, identifying where you're going to start. You know, what's the data that's important for the problem or challenge you're trying to address? all right, with the use of AI or the AI spectrum of technologies, and narrowing that.
I mean, that seems to be one thing that's very important, that it's not about these companies going to any of you and talking about, I want to do AI. It's, what do you want to do with AI? Leslie, from your perspective, what's like one of the most common things that you hear people are talking about trying to do with AI, across a broad spectrum of business? Is there like a commonality, or is there something that you recommend that you think people should be doing?
Well, the mistake most clients make is to focus on the software and the technology, which is massively hyped, and the capabilities are increasing all the time. But the real question they should be asking themselves is, what is our business problem and what is our business imperative? The technology should be a long way back in terms of thinking, really. But you should be listening to the technology, and the technology is moving all the time. So the client position is, when do we jump into this technology and get business value out of it? And I'd like to put a word in for the clients here, because I think there is a data challenge which you can't dismiss, because all the evidence we have looking at clients trying to introduce this stuff is they run into big problems with cognitive technologies on the data challenge. The data challenge is a bigger challenge than the technology very often.
Is the challenge that they don't have enough, or is it always quality?
No, it's the quality. It's the inheritance. They inherit a very indifferent database. I was looking at one organization the other day, and about 15% of the data was usable. And then 40% of the data that you run through a cognitive technology to build the algorithm, about 40% of that has to be training data that you run against the actual data you need in order to find the counter message. Most organizations have very poor data, and they need to gear it up to use these technologies. In fact, it's a warning sign I put up. Don't think about this until you can think you can deal with the data problem.
Right.
And then it goes back to that point of context, is we've got so much data, but it's not interrelated. Yeah. We still haven't got single customer views in our businesses.
Well, actually, I'm curious, like, how often do you run into the problem of businesses having data sets that are incompatible with each other, even stored in different formats? I mean, I can imagine that can be a huge problem, because
every single one,
stovepipes,
all of them,
all of them.
Yeah,
even brand new startups, companies you think would have a zero architecture, they've started from scratch. Even within a few years, they've got that separation and complexity. Salesforce.com doesn't talk to their Concur, doesn't talk to that, doesn't talk to this. And in fact, cloud, in one way, is exacerbating this. It's creating even more different islands of data.
Right. Well, and then some people like to keep their data private, so at some point there's some data that's inaccessible to you. But it's fascinating that it hasn't changed, because you talked about the 90s, and I worked and covered technology in the 90s, and data stovepipes was one of the biggest issues. Industries wanted to talk to each other,
still there,
and they couldn't do it back then. So it amazes me. Pam, when you talk to a company about their data and about collecting data, do you recommend, or do you start to get into how to collect signals from more things, like, beyond simply customer client data? Maybe you're getting sensor data. We talked about all carrying phones, and the phones have tremendous number of signals that they're pulling in. Is that something that you engage with clients on?
That's right. I mean, nowadays as well, people talk about Internet of Things and IoT sensors being out in the workplace, and there are some clients who are sort of thinking about how do they also collect signals from sensors that are out in the workplace and combine that data with other data that they've got in their organization from a more structured perspective, to then learn from that to decide what they might do. And we're seeing that, for example, in IT organizations. Right, so from an IT function perspective, understanding how devices are being used out within the workplace, and then collecting signals to understand and use that to maybe improve IT service management and service monitoring.